Right, well, I'll kick us off. Welcome, everyone, to Born Social Presents eCommerce on Social. I will be your host today. I'm Ed. I'm Head of New Business and Marketing at Born Social. And for those of you who haven't been to any of our Born Social Presents sessions before, or who aren't fully aware of who we are a creative-led social media agency, normally based out of East London. Currently, we are in various locations all over the country, actually. And Born Social Presents, well, it's our twice monthly, at the moment anyway, opportunity to focus on an area of the industry where we're seeing significant change, and where we feel like a lot of people are asking us a lot of questions and need potentially some more support than normal. Now, one area that has seen probably more change than anything is e-commerce. We know that consumers have completely new priorities, they have new budgets, and they definitely have new behaviours. And what that ultimately means is that brands and businesses need to adapt. And that's it really, I guess. So the good news is that we're seeing a hell of a lot of people doing that in a number of different ways, in a really interesting ways. And we've had some great success with a number of our clients too, both from a pivoting and adapting perspective. Now, what we would like to do today is share some of those successes and talk you through exactly how we think and some practical tips and tricks for you that we think you could apply to your own brands and businesses. Now, we're going to follow the format which we have done for a couple of our Born Social Present sessions so far. So normally we try and keep this about 45, 50 minutes. We know you've got busy days and we know it's early already, but ideally, we're going to have Callum, our strategy director, kick us off and cover about 15 minutes of the beginning of the session, where he's going to talk through the overall analysis of what we're seeing, the changes in market, and some of the successes we're seeing from other brands in the industry. And then Callum's going to hand over to James. James heads up our media team, and he's really going to take you through some of the more practical tips, tricks, and approaches that you can take to your own e-commerce strategies. As I mentioned, he's going to go into a lot more detail in the practicalities. We are going to be sharing the deck afterwards, so if you're missing it or you feel like we're flying through too fast, don't worry, you'll get it afterwards. And most importantly, the third section of the day will be a Q&A. This is where you guys get to submit your own questions and try and get your answers. We have been overwhelmed by the number of questions we've received in all of our previous sessions. To mention, there are quite a few hundred of you in here today, but it's amazing, and please do submit any questions you have. You look, there's a Q&A section at the bottom, and you can just type in whatever questions you have. We will try and cover all of them. Inevitably, it's very difficult for us to do that if we aren't able to. We have an email, shout@bornsocial.co.uk. Just drop us an email afterwards with any questions or just feedback on the sessions. We're using your feedback to develop what our sessions are, how we format them, and also what the actual content we cover every couple of weeks. So please do send us any of your thoughts and questions, and we will definitely get back to you. Otherwise, I've no further to do, so I'll hand over to Callum, who's going to be kicking us off with the insights today. Callum McCahon.
Morning, everyone. Thanks very much, Ed, for the introduction. So as mentioned, I'm just going to take the first 10-15 minutes to chat through more in a broad perspective what we're seeing is changing and how that's impacting brands and businesses. So there's a theory going around that I quite rate, which is that coronavirus has basically acted as an accelerator for lots of trends that were taking a long time to take over anyway. So things that might have taken 5-10 years to change, we're seeing changing in a really rapid amount of time. I think nowhere is that more appropriate than in e-commerce. So you might have seen this tweet going around, the kind of gradually then immediately effect. So e-commerce as a share of retail in the US over the last 10 years gradually trickling up. And then in the last 8 weeks, it growing more than it's grown in those last 10 years. And we've seen that in the UK as well, to a greater extent. So these are the latest figures in from national statistics from last week, showing that e-commerce is now 30% of all retail spend in the UK as a result of lockdown, which is mammoth figures that we've kind of never seen before. So something really big is happening. And it's no surprise as to why that's happening. Over the last 8-12 weeks, people have been going out a lot less. They're kind of not able to get out in the same way as before. So they're going online in order to get the same products and services that they needed. And just really interesting to look at the sorts of businesses that have been built with e-commerce at the heart. So Shopify, Amazon, when lots of businesses are struggling right now, and these sorts of businesses are really seeing a lot of confidence from shareholders and investors, because they're set up for this new reality. So just a really interesting thing. But with all of this, it's really important to apply a level of nuance. Whilst yes, the overall picture for e-commerce is up. We're seeing this study is probably my favorite version of lots of similar levels of analysis on this. Overall e-commerce is up around 50%, but that is split by category. So we've got these new essentials, medical, household goods, even baby products, seeing huge growth over the last few weeks. And then we've got these new lockdown living kind of new essentials like toys and games, health and wellness, working from home, these new categories that we're really getting into during lockdown. But then you've got categories like travel and luxury, who are obviously struggling more than others right now due to changing habits. So it's important to look at this in a nuanced way. But what I wanted to take you through this morning was, I guess, 3 different areas, 3 things that are contributing to this shift, and essentially build our argument for why this is a long-term shift rather than just a short-term tweak in habits. So going to start by looking at the supply side, to look at businesses and how they've pivoted and what that means. Then going to look at the consumer side, so how are behaviours changing, how are people changing their habits, and then I'm going to tie it up by looking at what roles social is playing in tying these 2 things together. So we're going to start with the businesses, because it's just been quite interesting to watch over the last few months, the amount of innovation and transformation that's happening in such a short amount of time has been really, really interesting to see. So on the bigger business side, we're seeing lots of businesses lean into e-commerce for the first time. So P&G, famously not mastered e-commerce to date, have launched their biggest foray into it with P&G at Home. Aldi, who have never been able to make the margins work on any form of e-commerce, are now partnering up with Deliveroo to order groceries through the internet. PepsiCo, again, massive FMCG company who have never been able to get direct to consumer right, have just launched 2 different websites where you can order snacks, crisps, that sort of thing, direct to your home. And Heinz, who have been in operation since the 1800s but never have sold kind of direct to consumer over the internet, managed to get an e-commerce setup designed and launched in just 7 days, which is just really interesting. We're seeing huge efforts from the biggest companies to get into e-commerce. But perhaps the most interesting stuff is happening on a smaller scale, where it's not just new streams of business, it's genuine building business models again from the ground up. So places like breweries, who previously relied on going direct to the pubs, and now having to go direct to their fans and offer a different setup. Restaurants who relied on bringing people into their physical space and serving them food, having to reinvent how they do that. Things like meal kits and delivery, lots of them leaning into that. On a different level to that, the butchers and fishmongers who previously sold direct to restaurants on a wholesale basis, and now for the first time going direct to the end consumer. Just a really interesting change in business model that you wouldn't bet against them keeping after we're out of this. And finally, places like wine bars, who again really relied on that physical space, the bricks and mortar, and now leaning hard into e-commerce setups. So on a smaller scale, there are lots of businesses who are completely reinventing how they provide value and how they make money. And it's all got e-commerce at the heart of it. So I just wanted to dive into this wine bar example and look at a wine bar called Top Cuvée, who are a local neighbourhood wine bar in North London. And I think they are, I guess, one of the best examples I've seen of how a business has pivoted and managed to provide different value. So as I said, neighbourhood wine bar, very reliant on in-person trade. And on the night that Boris announced that we were going into lockdown, they had a team meeting to discuss, basically brainstorm, okay, what are we going to do? Shutting down probably isn't an option for us. We need to provide a different way to survive. And they came up with the idea of pivoting to Shop Cuvée. You might have seen them on Instagram. They've been making a lot of noise. So they have pivoted to a full e-commerce setup business, selling wine, but also groceries, essentials, daily items, all that sort of thing, now clothes as well. And they've made a really good go at it. So they've created a lot of noise on social, but they've also been able to create a lot of demand around this new offering. And we thought this was a really interesting case study to look into, because our theory was that throughout this, the amount of kind of opportunity they've seen in this challenge, they've managed to not only, I guess, survive, but actually grow their business as a result. And if you've been in any of our webinars before, you'll know that we have spent years criticizing people for using follow account as a view of success. I'm going to waive that temporarily for the next minute or so and look at follow account for Top Cuvée, because I think it's actually quite interesting. Because for a local wine bar, I think actually if you're following them, there's not much reason to follow them unless you are looking to be like a loyal customer. So I think it's quite a good indicator of how they've managed to grow their customer base over the last few months. So if we look at how many new followers they were gaining pre-lockdown, pre-Shop Cuvée, pretty good rate, about 100 a week. And then look at what happened after they pivoted. They've absolutely skyrocketed. They're gaining almost 500 new followers, new potential customers every single week, which shows the power that they've unlocked by almost changing their business model. So we actually chatted to them about this because we thought it was a really interesting case study. And they basically confirmed what we thought. So the decision to pivot was made out of necessity, fighting for a way to keep our business afloat. We've definitely grown our customer base during all of this, and social media has undoubtedly played a huge part in this, and we'll 100% be keeping up with e-commerce and looking to ensure it's a mainstay of our business going forward. So this is not just a temporary pivot that they're making. This is a fundamental change to how they're set up as a business. They're currently exploring warehouse spaces to kind of carry this through, even when they're able to open their wine bar up again. I just thought this is a really good example of how the fundamental rules of business are changing for good. So I think there's 3 reasons why this is going to go beyond just a temporary pivot. Exploring e-commerce for businesses that haven't before is offering them diversified revenue streams, which if we go into some form of economic slowdown, which it looks like we will do, is going to be crucially important. Equally, getting closer to their customers, having more control over that whole journey is also going to be super important over the next few months and years. And finally, if we're seeing shifts in consumer demand, consumer behaviour, meeting customers where they want to be met is going to be really important. So these are 3 reasons why I think now that businesses are starting to get a taste of the potential of e-commerce, they're not just going to go back to the way it was before. So next, going to look at that. So we've looked at the supply side. Now let's look at the demand side. What is changing in terms of how consumers are thinking about e-commerce and acting? And it's fair to say, at first, it's a horrifying picture. If you remember 2 months ago when everyone was panic buying, couldn't get loo roll anywhere in London. At first, there was a massive herd mentality thing going on. So as we went into lockdown, something that we've never really experienced before, there was a huge widespread behavior change in terms of how we shop. And e-commerce was one of the big solutions to that. You know that by just looking at how hard it was to get a delivery slot for the main supermarkets. people were craving e-commerce more than ever before. But there's also some other interesting things happening here. I think for me, one of the other things is this removal of friction. One of the barriers to ordering online that's been trying to be solved for ages now is the not being in to receive a delivery. And that has been almost entirely eliminated overnight, given that we're all just at home all the time. It makes shopping online a lot easier. And there's lots of little things that have happened to remove friction here, which also helped. But finally, and I think most importantly, I think there's been a widespread questioning of assumptions. People always make assumptions naturally about what you should and shouldn't, can and can't order online. Things like smaller products, cocktails, food, that sort of stuff. Previously, wouldn't really have thought of ordering that online. During lockdown, these have become normal behaviours, and so things like ordering cocktails through the internet is now almost a widespread behaviour during lockdown. So, and I think it's unlikely that will go back to the way it was before. So, M&S chief also kind of agrees with this. Has stated that they think that coronavirus will change shopping habits forever. And GWI also did some research into this as well, which I thought was quite interesting. Obviously, caveat, this is claimed behaviour. This is what people say they're going to do post-outbreak. It's still interesting and a good signpost for us. 40% think they'll buy more things online for home delivery. 30% think they'll visit stores less frequently. So even if it's not to that extent, we still think there's going to be a big shift that outlives the outbreak. So lasting shifts on the consumer side as well, we think. And when kind of thinking about these two areas, it became really apparent to us that they're not happening in a vacuum, right? They both drive each other. Businesses pivoting change behaviours, and behaviours feed back into how businesses are operating. They're intrinsically tied. I think the really interesting thing to us during the last few months is seeing how social commerce has been the thing that has almost tied these things together. So social commerce is how businesses are getting the word out about their pivots, about their new products, their new services, but it's also how they're understanding what is changing in behaviour and how they're feeding that back in. So that's why I wanted to touch on social commerce just to finish this section. And what's really interesting is we've seen kind of changes across the funnel. So in terms of demand generation, this is happening in a very different way, but also in the conversion journey and how people are converting online. So in terms of demand generation, I think we've seen during the crisis almost a renewed role for current audiences. So your fans and followers, your kind of most loyal customers, are probably the most likely to be the ones who are going to give your new product, your new pivot, your new service a try, especially for those big FMCGs who are offering e-commerce for the first time. It's likely to be the loyal customers who are likely to try that first. And that's why getting closer to your customers is such an important thing right now. But social is also the fastest way to find new ones. So I think Shop Cuvée are an awesome example of that. Even if you're not in their neighbourhood, they're now offering delivery across the UK, and social is where they're able to kind of get that word out beyond who they're able to talk to before. But also in the conversion path, social is being used as a way to almost get to a minimum viable product e-commerce setup. Switching entirely to e-commerce can be expensive. Website, payment, software, all that kind of stuff. Lots of businesses are using social, even just messaging, to kind of get a setup together before committing. So allowing them to test and learn before investing, which is just a really interesting development. And we've seen in the last week or so that Facebook have announced Facebook Shop. And you might think, I certainly did. I swear I've heard this before. They've launched something very similar before. I think they have. But we're really backing this to be a success this time for a couple of reasons. It's a unified platform. So this backend will sit across Instagram and Facebook rather than being separate. which I think will really help it. The whole experience will happen in app, so you won't have to leave the app to actually check out and give your payment details, which removes that friction. They're launching with key partnerships like Shopify and WooCommerce, which gives them a huge leg up. And they're integrating loyalty schemes, payment software, etc., into the setup, which again will really help it achieve success. So we're seeing shifts across the entire social funnel. I think just as a final note, we always believe that the brands who get this right are going to think about that as a joined up experience. So not just treating performance and brand as very separate things. It's the brands who treat that entire journey through social as a kind of fluid experience, the ones that will succeed. And we think that's really coming into its own over the last few months. So these are the three shifts we're seeing. We're seeing businesses pivoting at a rate that we've never seen before. We're seeing changing behaviours from a demand side, people craving e-commerce more than ever. And we're seeing that social commerce is really, growing up and acting as the link between these two things. And that's why we think that this is a lasting change rather than a temporary pivot. So that's enough for me. I'm going to hand over to James, who's going to give us some practical advice for how to approach this new landscape.
Hi guys, James here. So just wanted to kind of share a few tips with you guys on how to adapt your kind of current e-commerce strategies to the new conditions that Cal just took us through. So I guess when this whole kind of lockdown started, there were a lot of headlines flying around. Pick this one out. Retail will see a 2.1 trillion loss globally in 2020 due to the coronavirus pandemic. And I think those kind of headlines, whilst we have to take them seriously, can be a little bit misleading because when we look at the performance of our clients over the last couple of months, we actually saw a pretty different picture to kind of what you might have seen on the blogs or in the news. And to sum those up, essentially, compared to the same period in 2019, in terms of our conversion rates online, they're actually up 43% compared to what they were previously. Our CPMs are down 22%. So, all the ads that we are buying for clients, we're getting them at a cheaper cost, which means we're able to reach way more people than we were previously. And those two things have led to the average ROAS across all of our Born Social clients being actually up 28%. So for every pound that they're putting into the system, they're achieving 28% more than they were this time last year in terms of returns. So we're actually quite excited by this, and it showed us that there was actually opportunity for brands and businesses to thrive during the crisis by making kind of simple pivots that can have a really, really big impact. E-commerce didn't collapse, essentially. It's just changed, and if you change with it, that will kind of set you up for success in the short term, but also longer and further down the line as we kind of return back to normal. So today I'm going to take you through 4 kind of quick points and tips around how you can do that. So firstly, how to pivot your offer for the new normal. Secondly, we're going to look at how new behaviors mean you need to think about new audiences. Thirdly, when it comes to budget, spend as much as you can afford. And finally, considering short-term levers to kind of help you navigate through the kind of next few weeks until kind of easier times come around the corner. So let's get straight into it. Firstly, how to pivot your offer for the new normal. So I think in this crisis, as Cal mentioned, there have been categories that have experienced massive growth due to changing demand. And there have also been categories which have just kind of declined due to kind of restrictions on movement and a lack of, relevance for those type of products whilst we've been in lockdown. So for example, we've got household products, online entertainment, personal and self-care, fitness equipment, and insurance, all areas where, they've seen a massive kind of growth. But equally, things like travel, gyms, restaurants and dining, hairdressers and salons, casinos and bookmakers have all experienced a drop off due to kind of restrictions that have been placed on their users, which mean they're no longer accessible in the way that they were before. What we have kind of seen is that actually it's quite simple in many cases, if you're in a kind of declining category, to pivot and almost kind of borrow from those categories that are booming in your strategy and your creative to kind of convert slightly into one of those growing categories temporarily, so that you can kind of ride that wave of increased demand rather than being kind of in the declining category. So, for example, travel would become staying at home, gyms become kind of running and cycling, restaurants and dining, as we've seen, move to delivery, hairdressers and salons become personal care, and kind of casinos, online bookmakers kind of lean into that online gaming side of things. So this is an example for one of our clients as to the kind of creative that we would have been running leading up to the kind of start of the summer season in early March. As you can see, it kind of focuses on holidays, the main creative proposition. We have colourful towels on the beach kind of as the main product focus, looking at how we can kind of inspire people and excite them about kind of being outside and getting away for their summer holidays with a kind of aspirational and lifestyle theme. However, with the kind of current climate and what we've kind of all been subject to over the last 8 weeks, this isn't the kind of thing that's going to resonate with people, because it just doesn't reflect their reality. And that has a negative impact if we were going to continue to run similar ads like this and hope for that kind of results to stay the same. So we pivoted and have run something like this instead. So instead of focusing on kind of being outside and looking at the beach, we've changed our kind of creative to look at how we can use similar products in the home and focusing on the kind of stay at home and self-care theme, which we know is super popular right now. Equally, we're focusing on the hair wraps product range in our kind of mix rather than our kind of beach towels. A simple pivot, but again, reflects the reality that people are living in right now, and put something in front of them that they are more likely to need in the here and now rather than further down the line. And it's clearly indoors, reflecting the current situation that we find ourselves in. So a simple pivot in kind of the ads we're running, same brand, becomes so much more relevant. We've kind of transformed from being beach outdoors to inside stay-at-home personal care, which we know is growing right now. And again, another product, so quick cool towels, you know, to be used in the gym and your kind of group fitness studios. The creative, this one was run early this year and at the end of last year, clearly set in a gym or fitness studio, multiple people exercising together. I know we're calling gym goers out in the copy, saying it's a gym goers must have, which is great when all of these things are possible. But right now, this is so far away from the life that people are actually living that it's not going to convert in the same way that it was previously. So again, we had to pivot. And we moved to creative similar to this. So as you can see, is a clear stay-at-home theme. You've got someone, you know, doing yoga in their living room, using our towels in a really creative way, and showing how they can be kind of used differently to how you might expect them to be used. And again, we're calling that home workout out in the copy, just in case it isn't clear, to kind of give people that extra nudge and let everyone know that, you know, we are still relevant in these times. It's just that you use us in a different way. And the impact of this has been really, really positive, actually. So on this graph, you can see our kind of customer acquisition costs, CPA, for 2019 and 2020. As we've gone through February and into May, we've managed to keep it fairly consistent with how we were doing last year, despite the kind of change in consumer behavior that we have seen. But interestingly, our revenue this year has gone up massively. So we're paying roughly the same amount for each customer that we're acquiring to the business. They're spending more with us, and therefore our profitability goes up, our revenue goes up, all because of a simple pivot, changing us from a travel brand to a kind of stay-at-home personal wellness and self-care brand. You don't need to change your whole business. It can be done really smartly with the creative that you use. So that's the first recommendation that we would make for adapting your strategy. Secondly, just wanting to talk about how the new behaviors that we have seen from people mean you need to think about new audiences. So 2 things that we're going to recommend here. Firstly, you need to widen the net of your targeting, and then you need to give it a big refresh. Reason for that being, essentially social media usage has shot up over the last few months, which means there are simply more people on the platform than there have been in the months leading up to. You can see here the kind of forecast for social media usage growth in 2020, 1.5% growth for Instagram, 1.7% for Snapchat, and actually a drop predicted for Facebook. But those forecasts have been massively reversed as lockdown has kind of kicked in, and there are just more people on the platform spending longer on it, which gives us an opportunity to speak to new people who we might not have necessarily been able to reach before. And secondly, in terms of refreshing the targeting, I thought this tweet from David Herman, quite a big, I guess, name in kind of D2C sector, speaks a lot around Facebook ads. Said that as people start to go back to normal life, it's a reminder to kind of update your lookalike audiences, because the behavior of audiences in the last 60-ish days is not the same as the people who might have been buying before that. And I think it's true, because people have changed their behavior so much that you actually might have had people come to your brand who wouldn't have necessarily needed to before. And I think we need to take that into account when it comes to who we choose in our audience targeting. So a couple of things I just wanted to share with you guys that we can look to test. Firstly, lookalike stacking. So kind of we've seen that this has been really useful for scaling performance and optimizing with the kind of campaign budget optimization tool. But essentially, you're stacking your standard lookalikes, purchase, add to cart, and initiate checkout, breaking them into single percentages, and keeping those as ad sets in your high spend campaigns. It's worked really well for some of our clients, and would recommend that you give that a go. Secondly, if you're also running paid search, you can use something called a G-cleared string to build audience of people who arrive at your brand via search, similar to a UTM code. It's really great for prospecting, because you can build a lookalike of people who've kind of discovered your brand through search, but you can also obviously retarget people who you know have had access to your brand through that way on social. And as your kind of customer profile might be starting to change, using this is a really good way of kind of working out who that new person might be and speaking to them with slightly different messaging maybe than you might speak to your kind of normal customer. And then finally, CRM. As I said, you're likely to have picked up a new type of customer, so it's worth segmenting out your CRM audiences kind of pre and post COVID. Download those emails, use them in your lookalikes, or you can send kind of special offers to loyal customers, or speak to kind of newer customers who you haven't spoken to before. Those 3 things kind of used together set to have a really big impact on your overall performance. And so the advice in growth categories would be keep your successful campaigns running for lockdown as long as possible. Build out those new audiences, but don't kind of change the things that you've been running and have been working. Just kind of build some new ones out and kind of feed them in over time to keep things running really smoothly. However, if you've kind of been struggling over the last couple of months, we're entering a period of increased mobility. So refreshing your audiences is a really good way to give your performance a kickstart. So again, would recommend that you kind of start to think about that too. Great. So moving on, in terms of budget, main advice here is to spend as much as you can afford. Reason being is that prices have really never been as low on the platform. So on the left here, we have the FTSE 100 from kind of late February to mid-May. And then on the right, you've got our kind of Facebook CPMs over the same period. Now, bar a little spike in May, they kind of roughly follow a similar pattern of kind of dropping and then kind of slowly started to pick back up. But interestingly, kind of advice around investing right now is to kind of buy shares whilst low. And we would argue that that advice is exactly, it can be applied to your social strategy as well. Why is that? Well, because scaling is really hard at the best of times. And so the more data that you're giving Facebook, the more quickly it's learning who to serve your ads to. Increasing your spend whilst demand is up is going to give you the algorithm more data. It will make your performance more efficient. And that same data can be used in your new audiences post-crisis. So whilst things are cheap, it's a great way of kind of feeding loads of ads through the system and just getting loads and loads of learnings that you can use going forward. But also you can kind of invest in your brand. I'm saying here, like, invest in cheap eyeballs, because prospecting can be costly. We're speaking to people who've never heard of us before. So this is a really good time to look at potential new buyers while CPMs are low. You can buy cheap traffic and retarget against it later, or implement things like new testing plans to diversify and look for sales kind of in areas where you maybe weren't looking for them before. And if you do it right, this is what happens. So on one of our clients who their kind of art supplies, pencils, stationery, which has seen a massive boom in lockdown, we noticed a massive spike in our return on ad spend due to increased demand, which meant that instead of kind of riding that wave and looking at how good our profitability was and kind of saying, oh, look at how much we're kind of generating for a really cheap cost, we actually decided to really ramp up the spend. So kind of ride that wave and ride the momentum of the increased demand. And the impact obviously is like really, really clear on our overall revenue. So if done right and you're in the right position, leaning into just increasing your spend as much as possible, or at least keeping it constant, can have a really, really positive impact on your overall results when it's all said and done. So advice here, if you're in a growth category, it's a great opportunity to reset your minimum investment, I guess, or your kind of new normal, to use the phrase that's been kind of thrown around a lot recently. Momentum on Facebook ads is so important. The algorithm thrives off kind of getting cheap conversions and then finding new people who are kind of similar to serve ads to. So if you're able to kind of get to a point where you're spending quite high now compared to what you were before, it will really help you to maintain that in the future, which is obviously beneficial in terms of kind of growing your business over the long term. If you're in a declining category, it may be really tempting to slash spend, but I think it's really, really important to try and maintain previous levels as much as possible, because just like I've said, momentum is really important. It's really, really hard to scale back up if you go back to kind of really, really low levels of spend, and you'll have to kind of start all your hard work all over again. So whilst it might be scary, I think it's really important to kind of try to keep things as normal as possible and kind of at your previous levels, because post-crisis it will be much easier to return back to those performance levels if you haven't slash spend or gone dark, for example. And finally, just wanted to talk about some short-term levers that you could potentially look at pulling on over the next kind of few weeks to give your business a boost, but also if you're kind of struggling to get conversions and kind of get sales. So reducing friction ensures maximum accessibility to products. So you want to make sure that you're kind of not preventing anyone from buying something that they would like to unnecessarily, I guess, because, you know, every sale literally does count at the moment. So making sure that there are kind of no barriers to entry, so to speak, is super important. The quickest way to do that in the short term is discounting, because, you know, a drop in price is very likely to generate a short-term increase in demand. But if that isn't possible, because it isn't always, think about other ways in which you can remove friction from your kind of purchase journey, with Facebook as the primary touch point in that. So this is an example of all of the different kind of ways in which you can do that. And I've just pulled some stuff from our client base, but also some stuff that I've just seen over the last few weeks that I've really liked. But you can see that there's actually multiple different ways to kind of discount or remove friction or kind of entice new customers in. You can go for the kind of full, like 25% off everything, big sale. But you can also kind of tempt people in with kind of minimum spend thresholds, which can protect your average order value, kind of offering 10% or 15% off your first order to attract new customers, or things like free shipping are also a really good way of reducing that friction and just making it as easy as possible and as accessible as possible for customers to buy from you. On top of that, free returns are super important right now as people lean into buying more things online. Having a really smooth and seamless returns policy is only going to make things more appealing for your users, but also it's actually quite something you can talk about in your content to bring people to your brand. And that brings me on to availability. So one of the things that we do on all of our clients at Born, we really make use of the kind of newsfeed headline underneath the ad, as well as the copy above the ad, because it's really great for kind of adding like additional little messages that maximize the availability of your product and just reduce that friction and kind of give people a little bit more comfort buying from you, knowing that if they do need to return, or they're not going to incur like other costs to kind of access you. So whether that's including your discount code, whether it's your 10% off your first order, but also with free shipping, 12-month satisfaction guarantees, you know, so, you know, if it does arrive and it's not right, there's not going to be a problem kind of getting a refund, but it gives people an incentive to give you guys a try if they're kind of looking for something new. And it's always great to talk about kind of new summer designs and the things that, I guess, USPs around your brand and what you're kind of up to that might interest people. And some of the results of this, we actually went on sale for one of our clients over the beginning of March into kind of April, where we saw a really big spike in our revenue. And again, we've gone on sales again towards the end, well, towards mid-May, coming up to the end of May. Interestingly, it's actually not had any impact on our average order value. If anything, it's gone up. So in the first sale through to the kind of period where we went back to full price, average order value stayed the same. But in the second sale, it's actually gone up by around £10. So if that's something that you're worried about, kind of going on sale and reducing your overall profitability, doesn't necessarily need to be that way. It's just about how you it's about how you think about your offer and the deals that you're kind of putting out there to kind of protect against a massive drop in kind of revenue and customer basket size. However, it's important to know that brand building and sales activation kind of work over different timescales. So short-term spikes, pulling on these short-term levers is really great for right now. And, you know, as we're in a crisis, it's probably a good time to kind of spark some additional demand. But we've seen that the best thing for long-term brand health are kind of more brand building activities on top of short-term activations to really kind of give users a reason to like believe in your brand and buy into it, other than things like price point. That a combination of the two is going to be the best way long term to maintain brand health. We would normally recommend around a 60-40 split, if possible, between long-term activations and kind of short-term tactical bits. So something to bear in mind too. And so advice here, with smart offers, discounting can actually increase your average basket size even whilst you're at a reduced price. But ensure you continue to invest in long-term activity to support those tactical activations. If you're in a declining category, discount if you need to increase your overall revenue really quickly. You could put in those spend thresholds to protect your average order value, such as you know, spend 20 to get 20% off type thing, and reduce friction from the first touch point using your headlines in your newsfeed copy areas to highlight those additional offers and reasons to buy other than the product and its USPs is going to have a really positive impact too. And so to summarize, 4 key things: you need to pivot your brand for the new normal, best way to do that on Facebook is by looking at the creative that you run, because that's where people are introduced to your brand and what it's all about. Doesn't need a massive business model change. It can be a really quick way to pivot and kind of reposition yourself. New behaviours mean new audiences. So the behaviour of people over the last 2 months mean that you need to rethink about who you're targeting and kind of how you're targeting them. Thirdly, spend as much as you can afford. It's so important to keep the momentum going. If you're in a strong position right now, really lean into kind of scaling, because it will really help you in the future. And if you're struggling, try to maintain a kind of minimum level of investment that you can kind of look to build on going forward. And finally, consider those short-term levers: discounting, kind of free shipping, good returns policy, to maximize your availability, and again, make it easier than it has been before to buy from your brand. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Ed for some Q&A.
Thank you very much, Mr. James Sackey, for that. Who thought eyeballs would be compared with stocks and shares? We really are living in the future. It's weird. Right, I'm aware that we are running at 48 minutes, so we're running tight for time. So I'm not going to be able to invoke my inner Nick Robinson on Matt Hancock on Radio 4 this morning and grill you guys for ages, but I do have a few questions I think are really useful for us to cover. I actually think I can cover the first question that we received today. There was a question just on how we producing the content, looks really good, and how we sort of adapting it. We did actually run one of our first sessions, lockdown, one of our first Born Social Presents sessions was called Production in Isolation, and it's a whole session done on how we're developing creative content, tips, tricks, what we think you can do. If you go onto our website, go onto our blog, we've collated all those presentations and all the work we've been doing on these sessions into a blog on the website. So please do go on there and you'll find more than enough detail on that specific section. And I think we can cover that there. There were 2 or 3 questions which I thought were really interesting, which I just want to cover in the last 5 minutes with you guys. And the first one's for Callum. I think it's really, I think it relates to what you were talking about, particularly with Heinz getting stuff in 7 days. But what can traditional and large businesses getting into the e-commerce space for the first time learn from D2C brands?
Yeah, good question. I think there's loads to learn. I think for me, the main thing is getting really close to the end consumer. So these big brands who are getting into it for the first time have almost a scary lack of information about how their customers are actually using the product, what they're enjoying, what they're not, what their needs are. I think what the D2Cs have done really well is get super connected with that. So look at brands like Glossier, who I think they've actually got a Slack community with their most loyal fans to get feedback on new products, to get information, all that kind of stuff. So I think the main thing for those brands to learn is getting really close to their customers in a data sense, but also in more of a qualitative sense as well. I think by doing that, they're going to unlock a lot of value. So yeah, I think that's the main thing I'd say.
Brilliant. Cheers, Cal. And as we've hit the 50-minute mark, which is our dead stop, I'm going to go for one more question. And for balance, I'm going to head it over to James. So this one came into, do you have any advice for those who have stopped spend entirely or are under pressure to stop any underperforming spend?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because although the advice is around kind of spending as much as you can afford, I don't obviously think it's smart to kind of, things still need to be profitable for you to be able to justify the investment in the channel. So what I would say is, if not possible, or if you have been kind of paused over the last kind of couple of weeks, start small and build back up with stuff that can work for you. So, what were your best performing audiences? What were your kind of products or ads that work really well? And start with them as a kind of like core. If you can get that up and running again with the numbers that you want to see, you can then start to build from there, rather than kind of trying to jump to like your kind of previous levels straight away. That's where we start to see inefficiencies come into your kind of funnel, essentially. and that will kind of have a really negative impact on your overall numbers. So the advice would be start small, look at your kind of core audiences and ads that you know are going to convert really, really strongly, and then look to build up from there.
Nice. Start small, build up. Thank you very much, James. Couple more questions came in about where you guys can get hold of the deck. I mentioned it at the top of the session today. We will be following up with everyone that signed up, whether you attended or not, with a recording of the session and a presentation slides from the session. So don't worry, you'll be able to get go through everything in a lot more detail. I know James went through some really interesting detail on targeting and on spend and all those kind of 4 key areas for adaptation. So yeah, please feel free to go through it in detail afterwards. I know we haven't managed to cover all your questions, so I do apologise, we are running tight. So thank you so much for submitting them. I mentioned it earlier, but if you email shout@bornsocial.co.uk, we'll do our best to get back to all those questions directly to you guys. And one last thing to note is that we've actually implemented a new e-commerce only service over the past couple of months. A lot of the success we're seeing and talking about today has come from campaigns run on that new offering, and really it's seeing some great success. So it's definitely worth you guys getting in touch about that. If any of you are having issues with your e-commerce or just want to talk with us about how you might want to change your strategy or get some advice, please again just email shout@bornsocial.co.uk and we can pick up a conversation from there. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining. It's been an absolutely brilliant session. Thank you very much, James Sackey. Thank you very much, Callum McCahon. And we will be hosting another event in a couple of weeks, so keep your eyes peeled. If you sign up to the event, you will be on the email list, so just keep your eyes peeled for email for us, and we'll be inviting you to the next session. Otherwise, thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.